Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome back to this afternoon session. I'm delighted to kick it off today's session 4 on youth tourism and commodification with a joint lecture titled Appropriation and Politics of German Colonial Heritage in Namibia, Alte, Feste, and Tintenpalast in Windhoek. And this lecture is jointly delivered by Walter Peters, who is Emeritus Professor of Architecture and Research Fellow of the University of the Free State, South Africa. He completed a doctoral thesis at the University of Hanover in 1981, which was then published under the title Baukunst in Südwestafrika 1884 bis 1914 and is currently translated into English, so all the English speakers it will be available soon. And the other presenter will be Jens WIEDOW, who holds a Master in Architecture from the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in Durban in South Africa. And he is practicing in various offices in Cape Town, Berlin, and Windhoek. In 2003, he joined the Department of Architecture at the Namibian University of Science and Technology as a lecturer in design and construction. Currently, he's a doctoral candidate at BTU Cottbus-Senftenberg in Germany and is actively involved in assisting the Namibian Heritage Council in the identification and preservation of the country's built heritage. So welcome, the speakers. And one is joining us online, and the person online will present first, so just with an idea.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to allow me to present. I'll jump right into it. I'll be discussing the Alte Feste. Right, the German colonial fortification in Windhoek, known as Alte Feste, is Windhoek's oldest standing building. It was built between 1890 and 1892 by German troops under the command of Major Kurt von Frantra and aided by 400 Africans as a forward operating base for the German Schutztruppe. Perched on top of a prominent hill and facing a wide valley towards the west, the building displayed a commanding presence as a symbol of German colonial might. The materials used in construction were sourced from the immediate context: burnt and unburnt clay bricks for the superstructure, lime as mortar, quartz, mica, sandstone, and tufa rocks for the plinths were all found in the vicinity. The only imported materials consisted of corrugated sheeting for the roof covering, timber for the roof structure, and 8 steel-framed windows used in the second floor of the western bastions. A large enclosing wall fitted with a west-facing entrance portal and numerous embrasures enclosed the central courtyard with single internal rooms. 4 crenellated bastions fitted with 3 additional embrasures on each side were placed on each corner of the fort. 2 of these bastions on the east and back side were built double-storied to provide lookout points over the landscape. Yet despite these defensive measures, the building was neither attacked nor ever used as a defensive structure. By 1895, 10 additional rooms were added between the north and southeastern bastions. Interior spaces were consolidated with additional rooms to form 4 distinct ranges against each wall. Embrasures between enclosed spaces were bricked up. By 1900, the western range was extended by 1 room and internal spaces rearranged. A new room was added to the southeast bastion against the external wall as additional accommodation and to additionally reinforce the purely built double-story bastion walls. New doorway openings connected the interior of the fort to the outside on the west, north, and eastern facades. New windows were introduced to the northwestern, northeastern, and southeastern bastion. In 1901, the entire western portion had to be rebuilt due to poor quality construction. This was planned and supervised by architect Gottlieb Redeker, who introduced a wide veranda space between the northwestern and southwestern bastions to shield the building from the harsh western sun and to act as the primary circulation to the adjoining rooms. Further verandas on the north and south elevations were planned, yet not executed. Following the catastrophic defeat of the Nama and Herero tribes during the uprising, the building assumed an administrative function for the Schutztruppe in 1908. All embrasures on the external walls were bricked up. The north veranda was built, albeit on a smaller version as originally planned, connecting most adjoining rooms. On the western side, existing rooms were further subdivided and connected to the veranda, including the entrance portal, which was also enclosed. By 1912, minor changes are made to the building, mainly in the eastern range to allow access to the eastern rooms from the outside. The building lost much of its military character towards the end of the German reign in Namibia. New pyramidal roofs were introduced to each bastion to resolve leaking roofs in 1910, and a thicket of trees had grown on the northern and western sides to mitigate the effects of the sun. Terraced gardens surrounding the equestrian monument, erected in 1912, completed this picture. Following the military conquest of Namibia by South African troops during the early stages of World War I, the building had been used as a troop barracks up to 1925, when it was converted to a school hostel. This entailed major changes. The eastern rooms were demolished and replaced with a wide veranda. All spaces to the west and northern ranges were accessible from the outside, while existing doors towards the courtyards were shut. The entry portal was reopened, and certain rooms combined as dormitories. This development continued into the 1930s with the creation of larger dormitories on the western range and the inclusion of 2 bathrooms on the north and south ranges. By the 1940s, the building, now in an increasingly deteriorated state, was on threat of demolition in order to build a new school hostel. However, the newly established Historical Monuments Council listed the building on their first inventory as an historically significant structure in 1948, and following a protracted negotiation with the administration, it was nominated for heritage protection in 1957. For unknown reasons, the full declaration as a national monument never followed. The building was adapted to the new functions of a museum and offices for museum staff. In preparation of the 75th anniversary of Windhoek's supposed founding by Kurt von Frantra, the building received its first thorough renovation in 1963. Faced with a meager budget of £3,740 for the renovation, the Historical Monuments Commission decided to change the building as little as possible at the least amount of costs. Internally, rooms are consolidated on the west range, befitting museum exhibition spaces. The bathrooms on the north and south ranges were removed, and some of the embrasures to the bastions reopened. Leaking roofs were replaced and the building replastered. And there were pyramidal capping to all bastions removed to reinstate the military appearance of the fort. However, the fort still maintained a full history of additions and alterations that characterized its existence up to this date, especially in the northern facade. You can see on the picture at the bottom over here, was a slightly awkward veranda addition of 1908 and the unfortunate partial enclosure of this veranda in 1938. This, however, would change again in 1986. Supported with a better budget, a second renovation improved the fabric and functionality with significant changes to the exterior appearance. Following the concept to restore the building's appearance to 1901 phase, the eastern veranda was enclosed, the western veranda completely demolished, and all embrasures to the bastions north and south facade reconstructed. New internal openings on the north and east ranges continued the exhibition circuit of the west range established in the 1960s. On the south range, new ablution block and kitchen provided the necessary services to the complex. The significant changes on the north facade seems to reinforce the military appearance of the Alte Feste to act as a backdrop to the neighboring equestrian statue within a larger heritage precinct that includes a number of buildings from the German colonial era. This representative requirement seems to have played such a pivotal role in the planning that openings extant during 1901 were closed and embrasures invented to make the building appear more fort-like than it actually was. Following Namibia's independence from colonial rule in 1990, the building continued acting as a museum up to the construction of the new Independence Museum in 2014, seen here in the background, which heralded the Alte Feste's loss of importance in the new heritage landscape. Without any dedicated function, use, or any form of basic maintenance funding, the building was left as a slowly decaying relic, serving only as a container for undervalued colonial monuments removed from public view. I thank you very much.
In 1910, Christuskirche, the center of the photograph, and 10 to 13, Tintenpalast. The same architect, Gottfried Bedeker, born in the pre-colonial era in Namibia. Rather unusual to have the colonial architect born in the country of origin, not in the mother or father country. The problem was that the government was arranged around 7 buildings distributed throughout the capital, Windhoek. So that and the idea of some self-governance is what triggered the development for a central government building. It was named Tintenpalast because of the allusion to the ink used by the bureaucrats who would occupy the palatial building. It's actually an E-shaped building, and you can see in the central stroke is where the chamber was for the Landesrat, with 30 people, half of which were elected, the other half nominated by the governor. The building went through very interesting design phases, and this is the cover of my thesis, published thesis, and you will notice that the central block is completely missing by the time you get to the last one. It's simply a portico within the unpedimented portico within that roof without any accent whatsoever. Very much neutral as this reconstruction, remodeling of the German embassy in St. Petersburg by Peter Behrens at almost the same time. But to return to Windhoek, this is what the building looked like at the end of the German era. It happens to be what you've just seen, the Alte Feste, the first substantial building of the German era, and this the last. Now, one of the things you shouldn't do, and Jens just pointed out the need for the veranda. The veranda is there to stop the direct rays of the sun from entering the core of the building. That's why you build the veranda. It works very well, but it works much better if you do what the South Africans did in the 30s. As a labor-intensive project for whites during the Great Depression and drought, and they green the surrounds. If you do that, then the veranda works perfectly. However, these gardens became very popular, so popular that unconscionably, recently they've been fenced up and made inaccessible. I do not know why democratically elected governments have got to do those sort of things. Nevertheless, the veranda has already been demonstrated for you, but I want to run through it quickly once before so that you get the gist of it. It was there to protect the core from the heat of the sun. And you recognize Christuskirche in the background left. Now follow that path. In the 1960s, what happened is what we're familiar with. Helmut Stauch and Ittenschüler designed a building for Karl List in the same street. But if you go there now, you'll see at the top something on the right, which is a new kind of architecture in 2011, opened in 2014, which is a gift from the People's Republic of Korea. With that, of course, you can get a very good view of what has happened in the meanwhile. Jens just showed you what the Alte Feste has become, and if you can swing around, you will also see the rider propped up from a little closer. But the point is, you can have a very beautiful view of Christuskirche, and if you swing to the right, the gardens in which the foreground of the Tintenpalast rests. Now, the Tintenpalast went through many phases. The first one, remembering what happened, South African forces, as a dominion, fought this war of proxy for Great Britain, which the Germans capitulated. Things continued pretty well as they were, until the apartheid rule of 1948 came into being, and a new assembly building had to be built for the whites. However, on the right, this is the extension to the Tintenpalast, it's on the right-hand side. And the architects had to design to capture the spirit of Southwest Africa. Today, it serves the Ministry of International Relations. When in 1990, Namibia became an independent republic, the old Landesrat in the center of the Tintenpalast now had to accommodate not 30, but 74 elected parliamentarians. So it was expanded, much like a Greek cross superimposed on the rectangular plan. And meanwhile, the Tintenpalast had been pretty well enclosed by verandas, so a very fine courtyard focus over there. But things changed. The Namibian parliament consists of 2 houses, a lower house and a lower house. It's a bicameral parliament. Lower house, fortunately, is on your right-hand side. they have behind the Tintenpalast, and the upper house was eventually built on the right-hand side over there. The big difference, of course, is no veranda. Air conditioning can do everything much better, of course, but at a cost. The Tintenpalast, as you can see over there, the original veranda is still there, but of course the extension is also without veranda. But if you look at the foreground to the upper house, you can see it's separate indeed, respectful of the old, and that's the path which has been taken over there. Christuskirche is in the foreground, Tintenpalast is on the right, and you can see the Landesrat was in the center of that, the extension for the whites, the Ministry of Relations on the right, behind the National Assembly, and then the National Council top left. So the Tintenpalast remained the focus of the whole composition. That kind of respect was only overshadowed from looking at the whole lot now by that monument on the left-hand side. All the rest, of course, is photographed from east, from behind the Tintenpalast, not in front. If you look at the front of it, you'll see it's in a very good condition. It serves mainly the president today. And if you look at it, the emblem of the parliament itself, it's got nothing else but the Tintenpalast. It happens to be missing its ground floor, but for the rest, it's all there. However, I'm worried about one thing, because 30 years after independence, the Ryder Memorial remained. All of a sudden, one Sunday, it was dismantled. It was built in front of the Alte Feste, and there it stayed for a short while. In 1912, it was deemed that it was actually a stop to national reconciliation and was demolished. And as you've already seen, the Ryder was then propped up in the courtyard of the Alte Feste. In its stead, in 2014, the government of Namibia passed a new constitution with many more parliamentarians who demanded a new parliamentary building. An architectural brief was issued, and the new building had to be resembling the endemic Welwitschia plant of Namibia, which is this huge plant which gets 500, 600, 700 years old, very old. But of course, the money wasn't there. So all we sit with today is this huge excavation in the premises of the Tintenpalast. But the acting governor at the time, colonial governor Schnee, rightly said, put this building up where it is. It'll have a commanding position. It'll be more appropriate and effectively serve the townscape. The message is build without iconography, build for human comfort and build for use. And that's why the building has survived. I'm quite convinced. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being having the time. I am delighted now to introduce the second presentation, which is titled The Gunzert House in Mwanza, it's Iringa Boma Museum, 2 German colonial building sites in Tanzania adapted for contemporary culture and education. And the speakers are Delphine KESSY, a senior lecturer of tourism studies and director of research at St. Augustine University of Tanzania, and Jan KUEVER, senior lecturer in cultural anthropology and tourism at the University of Iringa in Tanzania. Welcome.
Okay, good evening. Thank you to the organizers for inviting us, but also to the audience for holding out so long. We are having a really long day. And our presentation is called 2 German Colonial Buildings in Tanzania as Adapted Sites of Contemporary Culture and Education. So we are 2 presenters sharing this presentation. And unfortunately, my colleague and friend Delphine is not with us. It would have been much nicer if it would have been the 2 of us in front of you, but I would like to give to her now to present her case. Karibu.
Asante, and thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. And my name is Delphine. As I have been introduced, I'm sorry today my voice is not very well. I just believe that you hear me as I speak. So my work is to take you through the Gunzert House case in Mwanza. So the picture that you see there is the Gunzert House building, as it has been restored to completion in 2021. So our concept of restoring the house came after my university and, of course, the people in Mwanza, I mean the community, started to think of how we can develop tourism at a place where tourism was not a traditional economic activity. So we thought probably it would be nice to think of how we can bring tourists here, because my work was to develop the new tourism program at South. So the first question was, what would be the attractions of tourism in Mwanza? So at a place where there's no animals, at a place where, there are no beaches yet, even though we are located at where the Lake Victoria is, then the challenge was kind of, where do we get tourists, yet people had not yet started to do tourism as their main economic activity. So because of that, we had to sit, at different places, at different meetings, meet the community, and it was successfully agreed that maybe we should restore the house so that it could assist to attract tourists at this part of the country. So that is the house. Yeah, thank you, Yang. That is the house before restoration up until 2019. Next, please. It is the same, but yes, it is the same. But Yang, if you can delete this, no, yes, half of the house was restored, but part of it, they call it servant quarters house was not restored even until now, because we are yet to get enough funding to do the work. Next, please. So it is still the house as, after the restoration. Go ahead, please. Yeah. So this was the opening ceremony in 2021 after completion. And this house that we are talking was built in 1912, so it has more than 110 years. And next, so we think that it would help us in doing many activities as it is displayed there. Could serve as a museum for the people who are living in Mwanza, because especially this part of the country, we don't have 6 regions in total. We don't have public museum which can showcase, which is, anything that is surrounding our communities, but can also be used as art gallery space. And of course, we have started to make use of it. We see performing art taking place there after the restoration. And because the house is sitting at space of 6.4 acres, it can also serve as a natural botanical garden, because its land has not been interrupted since, since we found it way back in 2009. And of course, we have also started, because it was in our vision as well, community dialogues on different education needs, such as entrepreneurship skills. And it has saved an icon for exchange between Mwanza, which is a sister city of the Würzburg city in Germany. Maybe these are only, it's just 2 photos. These photos are, this after we started working on the house, the exchange of, of the sister cities of Mwanza and Würzburg started even before we finished the restoration. Next, please. And then before even restoration, we had started doing creative art activities. We see pictures of performing art, but again, we see creative, the drawings of the creative art, which were being done under the supervision of the other communal participants, but also students from the St. Augustine University of Tanzania. Next year, thank you, Iris. Just to be even, or to put even a summary, the aim of the house is at least to create a heritage tourism, and of course to diversify tourism from reliance on the wildlife tourism that is very famous in this country, and the beach tourism, and at least to go to cultural tourism, to educational tourism, and the likes. We are facing challenges a bit, and of course, even the process of restoring, we had faced that challenge because it took us only 8 years before we got into the stage we are today, because of low awareness or little awareness of the community on the potential use of the house. But again, even up till now, the house is not that very well accessible because of the road. We have a dirt road going to the house, so it makes it difficult for people to get to the house easily. So otherwise, I think that's the part that I can talk in my 7 minutes. I thank you so much for listening from me. Jan, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Delphine. Now I come to the second case, my own case, Iringa Boma Regional Museum and Cultural Center. Now I'm taking you to a part of Tanzania where Michael Falser and Ralf Egermann did not go on their tours, and also Nancy hasn't taken us there today. This is a sketch of the building, and this is the logo we are using. A little bit on the history of Iringa Boma. I wanted to add on the Boma, the meaning of Boma. It's a fort or stronghold in English, and it was originally used by the people for their homesteads when they were protecting it against wild animals and so forth. And then it was adapted to these administrative buildings in colonial times. The Boma I'm speaking about was built in 1914 as a hospital for Europeans, but then was used as a military hospital in World War I. After that, it was made administration building up to 2014 when we began to do restoration. And since 2016, we are operating it as Iringa Boma Regional Museum and Cultural Center. Just some few pictures here. This was the original floor plan of the building, which I found in the German records in the National Archives in Dar es Salaam, together with the budget and the letter correspondence about building it. I would like to add something on the materials here because we had it in the previous presentation. Also, this building was made of locally sourced materials, cobblestones, clay, wood. The roof tiles, they burned. So in restoration, for example, the roof tiles we had to take from Peramio, where Nancy was talking about, because in Iringa they didn't have the ability to do that tile burning anymore. Then we have the oldest picture here is from 1933 and during the British period. I have another one from 1977. And this is a bit. Now that's how the building looks like today after restoration. You also see the cannon here on the left lower side, one of the symbols of the German violent occupation of the lands, but we found it there in front of the building when we started to use it. I don't want to talk too much about the building now. I rather now go into what we are doing. What are the different activities? The first one is we are a museum. So we have some, let's say, conventional ethnographic exhibitions inside. But what we really want to do is to engage the communities, to make the communities participate. So maybe a more touching activity or exhibition that we had was one where we collected indigenous myths or legends from the land and the people of Iringa and converted them into artistic expressions on canvas. So that's maybe already leading us what we have tomorrow about the art. And it was a very successful project. So now we are in the second phase where we also try to convert these into comics, graphic novels, in order to reach a wider audience. Tourism, Delphine spoke about, we also do. We do town tours around Iringa municipality, and we have other German colonial buildings that we pass by. There's the old market in around 1910, and that's how it looks like today. Yeah, it's nowadays you see there's a lot of shop frames, etc. around it, and here maybe we can come back to the idea of colonial nostalgia, or how did we call it earlier. I would of course like to dismantle it again so it looks like this, but if you would do that, it would be like taking away the livelihoods of the people around. So it would be a very complicated process that you would have to replace the livelihood or somehow to create another space where people could make a living, what they do now from the market. Another one was the old military station, the real Boma, which is also still there. Or one building is still there today, but it belongs to the Tanzanian police. Here we have a continuity maybe of use, that it was the German Schutztruppe, and then later on it was given to the Tanzanian police. Yeah, this one I think I should do very quick. We do a lot of school education, which is, I think, very successful, that our staff and students are making curricula. What are they going to tell the people? We do artisan business development, for example, here in case of music. We have the pottery making of Iringa. You see some pictures. And we do basket weaving, supporting these women groups. And then they are selling their products here. It's inside of the premises. Also, archive and database development. Again, our students, you see of them here, how they are working on the objects, our collection, that we have to put them into proper database or database management, capacity building, you can call it. But not only ours, we also do provenance research on collections that are in Germany. We work as consultants. We do ethnographic research tours in the communities. And we talked about Steinmeier's visit today and his apology. We talked about Maji. This picture here to the right of the gentleman, that was as a mass killing site, or Maji in Njombe. Or another one here, that is the Lugalo monument, another colonial war, the Hehe War, where the first German expedition was annihilated in 1891. There's a focus group where we talked about objects in German collections. Now we have seen the Gunzert house, we have seen Iringa Boma as two examples maybe of appropriating colonial space, or our attempt to revalorize colonial space, creating value from the remaining colonial structures for the community. But it doesn't work to 100%, in my opinion. I'm always kind of torn. I'm proud of what we are doing, but on the other hand, I also feel like we have to overcome hesitation in the communities, or challenges from the communities in embracing that space. So I'm leading us back to that question that we had earlier today. Is or can what we are doing be decolonial when we are using that same space that has been colonial space? Or is it rather reproducing coloniality when we use the space again? And I haven't come to an answer personally, and I think we have to deal with that ambiguity or with that, it's I keep on doing, but always reflecting and critically trying to improve what we are doing to come to a real empowerment. We had it before. The presenter was talking about what is decoloniality, and I think he captured that very well, and it's empowering on both sides. So we are working towards it, but I'm not sure if we can do it if we deal with these colonial remnants. And with this, I would like to close my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this joint presentation. Now we have two online presentations, and I'm delighted to introduce the first speaker, Martin Kalb, who is an associate professor of history at Bridgewater College. And this presentation is titled The Harbor of Swakopmund in Namibia, Selling German Colonial Nostalgia in a Seaside Resort.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So thank you for the kind introduction and thanks for having me. Reiterdenkmal pops up at Swakopmund, titled The Newspaper The Namibian on February 16th in 2019. A replica of the Reiterdenkmal equestrian statue, which had already been mentioned, had been erected at Swakopmund's newest social and culinary hotspot, the Altstadt restaurant. According to the paper, the statue, quote, is already generating publicity, unquote. The equestrian monument replicated the statue in Windhoek. The latter, which was honoring German soldiers and civilians who died in the Herero and Nama War of 1904 to 1907, had been erected in 1912. The Namibian government removed it in December of 2013. Now, a replica about half the size of the original reappeared at a restaurant in Swakopmund. There would be much talk about it in the following month, with some residents demanding its removal. Restaurant owner Robert Zadlowski defended his choice. Quote, our intention is to try and get all the old stuff here and to give it a sort of museum atmosphere. People like to see these things, especially the tourists, unquote. Zadlowski thereby pointed to important stakeholders and their presumed demands and the heritage tourism that has long defined this seaside town. So my presentation today unpacks and wrestles with Swakopmund's heritage industry. Which buildings and spaces define Swakopmund's post-colonial tourism? What stories are produced, packaged, and sold? What images of Swakopmund have been generated by whom and for whom? I argue that Swakopmund's harbor quarter, a space about 1 square kilometer in size adjacent to the colony's former port, has become a self-contained tourist space selling German colonialism in a digestible format. Here, a heritage industry has evolved around the protected legacies of German colonial architecture, the visibility and power of German-speaking culture, and the demands of mainly white tourists. A perfectly packaged tourist product claiming authentic heritage ultimately sells a nostalgic vision of German settler colonialism meant for easy consumption. Now, my comments stand on the shoulders of an array of publications. Scholars have surveyed specific buildings and heritage sites, explored colonial monuments and memories, discussed Namibia's tourist infrastructure, and wrestled with colonial architecture and the formation of identities. Heritage tourism may be best defined as traveling to experience the places, artifacts, and activities that represent the stories and people of the past and present, has played a role as well. Scholars such as Manuel Hofmann, for instance, commented on the silences regarding colonial violence. Others have emphasized how tourist guidebooks, quote, produce a consumable colonial heritage light, unquote. Now, my focus on Swakopmund's harbor quarter is grounded in materials gathered over the last years. Defined as a heritage space, my analysis is meant to expand existing discussions. And I'll do so today in two parts. First, I provide some context and background, where I situate Swakopmund's rise as a tourist destination, including early efforts regarding the protection of certain sites and spaces. Part two then centers Swakopmund's harbor as a tourist space by taking the audience along a walking tour. I introduce stakeholders, economic frameworks, and broaden narratives in my efforts to shed light on the nature of heritage tourism in Swakopmund. Takeaways always invite comments and questions. This is in many ways a work in progress. So Swakopmund only exists because the Germans could not get a hold of Walvis Bay. In need of a landing spot for the newly established Protectorate of German Southwest Africa, colonists founded Swakopmund in 1892. The town was meant to become the colony's main entry point. However, landing remained tricky given difficult ocean currents and fog. Investments into landing structures failed repeatedly, most notably when it came to a silted-in concrete mole, a wooden jetty eaten up by the naval shipworm, and a metal jetty not completed prior to World War I. Still, Swakopmund boomed, especially as more supplies and resources had to be brought in to the colony during the 1904 uprising and the subsequent German genocide. The takeover by South Africa following World War I turned the region into a backwater still defined by German speakers. Many had remained in the region or returned, a storyline apparent in the history of heritage conservation. As outlined by one scholar, colonial buildings benefited from an excellent climate and continuities beyond 1915, given the rise of apartheid and the limited influence of Herero and Nama. Officially, the work of identifying and declaring part of the country's cultural and natural heritage began after World War II. First, there was the Historical Monuments Commission for Southwest Africa, which existed from 1948 to 1968. Heavily influenced by the National Party, which oversaw the implementation of apartheid, the initial commission also included former German missionary Heinrich Feste and teacher Fritz Gerdes. Following the passage of the National Monuments Act in South Africa, the National Monuments Council of South Africa took over in 1969. Although replaced after Namibia's independence in 1990 by the National Monuments Council of Namibia first and then the National Heritage Council, little changed since then. Just to give you a sense, by 2004, there was a total of 118 declared national monuments in Namibia, including 10 colonial buildings in Swakopmund alone. Now, travel guides and tourist materials long advertised Swakopmund's old German town center as heritage tourism. Discussions generally provide some broad context before promoting the country's most popular holiday resort and referencing Swakopmund's, quote, distinctly German character, unquote. Discussions then quickly moved to, quote, extravagant buildings which today represent one of the best preserved collections of German colonial architecture still standing. Since tourist guides encourage readers to explore these German-style buildings on foot, they keep visitors in the harbor quarter and in the colonial past. Starting points for such walking tours are generally the museum located right at the old harbor front and an institution that in itself is steeped in colonial nostalgia. Tourists can thus wander along the old silted-in mole with wonderful views of the shoreline and lighthouse, the colonial gaze. A glance at the old courthouse building nearby, the Wurman House in Bismarck Street with the Damara Tower, and the Hohenzollern House with its elaborate moldings and statue of Atlas are additional stops along the way. The tour might end at the old jetty, quote, a good place to see the sunset, unquote. Additional stops could be added at the old prison and Prinzessin Ruprechtheim, the evangelical church, and the railway station turned hotel. Written travel guides and many German-speaking guides dominating the industry on site comment on the year of construction, purpose, and efforts to protect these colonial relics, generally without much context regarding settler colonial islands. Anecdotes are woven into discussions. The story of a colonial official mistaking the prison for a hotel, for instance, invites tourists to smile while considering the architecture instead of pondering the broader purpose of a prison in a colonial setting. German nostalgia is meanwhile also served for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Visitors staying in Swakopmund will likely awake and eat breakfast at the luxurious Strand Hotel overseeing the former harbor. There's also, quote, the award-winning European restaurant at the Hansa Hotel serving stylish, elaborate, and quite heavy cuisine, using lots of sauces and quite formal surroundings, unquote. Travel and tour guides tend to reference German-speaking establishments and cuisines in historic settings to get, unquote, authentic experience, unquote. Such places include the restaurant The Tug, for instance, quote, is just that, an old tug raised up above the seafront next to the old jetty, unquote. Tourist guides speak of, quote, mouth-watering German confectionery at Café Anton and Café Treff, or the variety of German breads and cakes baked daily at Putinson's bakery, unquote. While Café Treff did not survive the pandemic, Café Anton, located in the Swiss House, still sells traditional German confectionery, such as the Black Forest cream cake, Florentiners, bee sting, and lots of other cakes. Beer brewed in Namibia since German colonial rule is part of the historic experience in the Brauhaus or the Altstadt restaurant, the latter featuring the aforementioned equestrian statue. Calls for the removal of that statue by Laidlaw Paringanda, chairperson of the Namibian Genocide Association, feel like disruptions of a tourist experience embedded in a historic environment. Now, during walking tours and in between excursions to natural sites outside town, tourists will pick up souvenirs fitting with heritage tourism. The bookstore sells colonial nostalgia in print with series titled The Good Old Days in Southwest. Travel guides and local tour guides will recommend Best Buys in Swakopmund, with many referencing Peter's Antiques. According to one travel guide, quote, perhaps the best antique shop in Africa, Peter's is a most comprehensive and eclectic collection. The owner, a small intense Namibian of German origin, started the shop in the early 1980s as an extension of his hobby, and since then his collection, his reputation, and the shop have gradually grown, unquote. While this tourist guide adds a note of caution regarding the ethics of such a collection, few visitors will feel uncomfortable when stepping into a somewhat cluttered space proudly displaying colonial memorabilia. Now, based on this brief visit to Swakopmund's harbor quarter, there are several takeaways that become apparent. First, Swakopmund's heritage industry is grounded in a long history of settler colonialism and apartheid. The city center has been preserved and protected thanks to commissions and initiatives overseen by whites. They protected, conserved, and sustained their heritage. The majority of Swakopmund's inhabitants, on the other hand, live on the outskirts of town. Their history and heritage are not included in the Old Town. Swakopmund's heritage industry thus has a clear audience: white tourists from Europe and South Africa with a disposable income who are intrigued by a certain history that does not make them uncomfortable. References to the inherent violence of settler colonialism are thus silenced and excluded. This is colonialism light, to follow one scholar, with quirky moments of eating German baked goods and having German beer in Africa while gazing at colonial architecture. Europeans in general, and Germans in particular, will feel at home and comfortable spending money and sustaining Namibia's economy, or, to be concise, the German speakers of the country. They are visiting a colonial heritage bubble disconnected from modern-day post-independence Namibia. Now, disruptions of Swakopmund's heritage industry are rare, but they do exist. Tourists might wonder about a large wall when entering town. According to one local newspaper, the Swakopmund municipality built it to shield the more affluent and beautiful side of town from the informal settlements along Nelson Mandela Road, which are making the town an eyesore. Dubbed the Wall of Shame, it outlines the existence of former townships that have developed outside of the space tourist guides define as Swakopmund. Disruptions also exist on walking tours. For instance, tourists might detect the red paint on the marine statue. In 2017, activists spilled it over this colonial relic, honoring German Marines to showcase the blood of Herero and Nama. Discussions about the removal of this site, introduced by the city council, had gone nowhere. Wilfried Grunewald, the single German-speaking person in Swakopmund's 10-member city council at the time, noted that removing the monument would hurt the city's economy and tourist industry. Members of the governing SWAPO party, promoting reconciliation and, unlike Herero and Nama, not defined by German colonialism, did not feel affected by the statue. so the statue still stands there today. In that sense, Swakopmund's heritage industry, defined by colonial nostalgia and visible in architecture, a local German-speaking heritage, and tourist structures, remains a well-oiled machine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for your insightful presentation. I'm now delighted to join the final speaker in today's session, Sonja Lawson, founding director of the Palais de Lomé in Togo. And she's joining us online for a presentation titled The Palais de Lomé, from a German colonial palace to an art and culture center to preserve biodiversity and celebrate Africa and its diasporas. Welcome, Sonja. We are now invited, as our final speaker is still sorting out technical issues. So hopefully she will be joining us very soon. Maybe, no, now not. It's Martin. Martin is back there. Hi. So are there any questions to the previous three presentations? Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I have one question for Martin and another question for Jan and Delphine. I'll start with Jan and Delphine, and my question is about the Mwanza Boma that you have renovated. From the appearance, it looks like it was inherited by the British, and specifically I'm looking at the windows, because when you look at your Boma, the one in Iringa and the one in Mwanza, you'll see a difference in terms of the windows and the architecture. And so I would like to know, how do you tell that history and demarcate the Germans from the British, and whether there was some inclusion and exclusions when it comes to the occupation of the site? And to Martin, mine is about the community and how the sea and the heritage is perceived, especially in terms of tourism. And here I relate with another site in Tanzania, which is called Mikindani, whereby the local community have resisted completely the dark tourism that is taking place, mostly because in the sea is where most of the people died, but also in terms of price, it's expensive for the locals to afford. And I would like to understand, how does the two play in your case? Thank you.
I think for the Gunzert house, Delphine has to answer the question, because I'm not an expert on the Gunzert house. What I can say about Iringa Boma, of course, we try to trace the history from one era to the next. I mentioned the use change, that it was originally meant to be a hospital, but the British then made it an administration building. And then we had also interviews with elders in Iringa who told us about the 30s, when they were going from the rural areas to Iringa to get those civil services at the Boma, which we were still doing until before we started to renovate. I personally got my marriage certificate and the birth certificate of my daughter from that building. So it's the use change, but we couldn't find much information on the British time, to be honest. About the Tanzanian after independence, yes, also it's difficult. Some people remember, but you don't find archive documents, or not many. It's very, very difficult to exactly trace the history of these buildings. Maybe that's what I can say to Boma. It's ongoing work, and sometimes you discover again something, and then you get this triumphal feeling. Yes, I have found out. For example, when I found this floor plan, the original one, we did the restoration without that because we couldn't find it. And then when I went to the National Archive the second time, I found it like somewhere in between other papers. So then it was really good. So then we had to revisit what we had already put in our museum already as information, because we had more than. So it's an ongoing process. And I would like to ask if Delphine is still around to talk about.
I don't think so.
Yes, I am. I'm still around. Delphine is still around.
Great.
So with the Yes, please. With the Gunzert house, it is still the same case with the Iringa Boma, because of course, for us, the work has just started because we only began the work in 2021. So even Iringa Boma is ahead of us. But, since the beginning, for example, we found it used to be called Robert Koch House. In other words, this person was a health specialist, and they called the house by his name because I think of many works that he did in East Africa. And we started, for example, in 2021, 2012, we found that eventually it was wrongly named, and the real name is the Gunzert House, which is now, popular for that. So, in other words, what I wanted to add on what Jan just said is that this is an ongoing work, and we were told, for example, the house was stopped to be used in the early 2000s, but before that it was used by the British administration, and of course Tanzanian administration as well. So we do not know, what was the origin of the house, even though if you look from the pictures of the house from the beginning, it is more or less the same, but we cannot tell which has been tempered or not. So it is an ongoing process, and we have started to do the work to trace the structures, the use of the house, because there are also some stories that the house has been used for different activities. But if you find anything as what Jan said, we came to realize it used to entertain official visitors, and especially the ship officers. And many people do not know these stories. Where do we get them? From any written document. We visit the National Archive, but again, from people who might be knowing anything from, anything storytelling. What was lacking in our history is that we relied on the oral history, and therefore there's nothing much written, and so you cannot find many things on archives. Thank you. This is what I may say.
Thank you very much, Delphine. Martin, would you like to also respond?
Yes, thank you for that question. So we're talking about very diverse communities when it comes to, I think, even within the German community, or those that have the power when it comes to the tourist structure, which that kind of presentation focused on maybe more so. When it comes to other communities, I think it's very complicated. The governing party is historically dominated by Ovambos, and that means they have a very different experience than Herero and Nama when it comes to their experiences with German colonialism. And we see that how it plays out in their use, in their participation or lack thereof when it comes to these tourist spaces. I'll just give 3 quick examples. For some for some of those communities, taking wedding photos on that piece of green grass next to the Marine Memorial is a reuse of that space because they enjoy that space and it's near to the courthouse, whereby, by the way, Namibian presidents tend to spend their vacation. So that's a reuse of some of those colonial spaces. Others are, there's a small genocide museum. It's basically a one room that's in more of that township part of town that German tourists will likely not go to and will likely not stumble upon. But those spaces exist and there is an effort to participate. And maybe as a last point, there is, from what I can tell, some demand amongst tourists to get connected to some of those voices that are currently not present. So there might also be an opening to provide tours that take visitors to the outskirts of Swakopmund and not just look at the German cemetery, but also look at the cemeteries at the edge of the desert where we have the mass graves of Ova Herero in particular and those that died in the camps in that particular space. So very complex when it comes to that community and how it engages or those communities.
Thank you, Martin. Next question.
Yeah, thank you very much for these very nice and very useful presentations. I would have a question to Walter and Jens online. It's a question of, I mean, as we have to see that in all previous, let's say, German colonies, there were, after the German impact, new colonial regimes impacting the countries like France and Great Britain, and of course then in the Namibian case, the Southwestern Union, the South African Union. And my question would be, if, for example, the German legislation for historic preservation, you would see an edited building value has been added from past regimes and past decades and past eras. So how would you judge the South African building layer over Windhoek? Would this already be a past history because now Namibia is independent, and would this be part of a value judgment for preservation? Or is this yet too early to do and to even restore? Thank you.
Yes, Jens, would you like to answer first, please?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. It's a bit of a complicated situation because none of the monuments, specifically the monuments to the victims of World War II, for example, have ever been listed in Namibia under any form of heritage protection. Neither has any South African historical layers either been documented or actually preserved in any particular way. The South Africans, of course, took a very particular turn on that by preserving predominant German colonial buildings for very political reasons to co-opt the German population in Namibia to support the Nationalist Party behind the apartheid agenda, which was a very important necessary step.
As I said, it was a war of proxy. South Africans didn't go in there to fight the Germans. They were a new nation. They were a dominion of England, though. And if you want a bit more information to that, the Afrikaans and the English community and the leaders saw an opportunity of linking those two white communities. And remember, the Germans supported the Afrikaners during the Boer War, only 10 years earlier. So there was no hurry to go and take over Namibia. In fact, nothing happened. Very little happened until 1948, when the National Party took over in South Africa, introduced apartheid, and they said to the German speakers in Namibia, we'll make German one of the three national languages. So the Germans all made their cross over there. So apartheid was introduced in Namibia, simple as that. So what happened thereafter? Well, a couple of important buildings, the post office in Windhoek, for instance, was suddenly a new building, but actually very little happened until democracy. But what you now see, of course, is a completely new architecture taking over where it really is problematic in many respects. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question until Sonna joins us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mine is not a question, but it was brought up in the first presentations. My name is Emmanuel Conrad with Tokyo. I'm from Uganda, East Africa. There was some speaker who talked about some monuments that are in certain country. I don't know if it's Cameroon or Togo, but they are like, they wanted to demolish them, and Germany had a plan of carrying the monuments here to Germany in Berlin. So I want to know, is this still going on? Like, what happened? I didn't get that. I wasn't attentive by then. Thank you.
And I have a question to Mr. KUEVER, because you were talking about we, and I didn't quite understand, maybe it just skipped my memory or so. Who is curating the space of the Boma Museum? And then it also seemed to me a bit the approach folkloristic. Do you have also a more modern approach where you involve new concepts? Yeah, because it somehow, well, that's my feeling. It also is a continuity of a colonial gaze, like the handicraft things you display and so on. So that would be my question.
The first part of the question was curating the space. Which institution? Yeah. We didn't have enough time for the presentation to do all this background information, but I work for the University of Iringa, and basically that's the mother institution, the University of Iringa. Under the department, I work in the Department of Cultural Anthropology and Tourism, and within this department, we got this opportunity with an EU-funded project to restore the Boma and make it a community culture center. So it's the university, but then also a bit later we registered it as an NGO as well, because it's always about funding, and some donor organizations don't like universities, so it's better if you're an NGO. So that's just realistic the way it was. So it's an NGO attached to the university. And then we have a team, like the management plus the whole staff team working there. The original curation of the exhibition, we also consulted the National Museum of Tanzania. We had one curator from the National Museum doing the first one, but then later on we kept on developing it ourselves as a team, curating the exhibitions that we do, involving our students, involving the communities, also speaking to the communities. The second question, I understand what you mean. If you look at these pictures, let's say the baskets, the pottery, and so forth. In my opinion, it's what the community presents to us. We went to the community. It was part of the larger EU project that we go and seek advice. Who can we support in terms of culture and heritage? And that's what was mirrored back to us. That it's this is the culture. This is the culture that we have, and it's still valuable for the people. So that's why we decide to support. Maybe for a more modern thing, in addition, is to go into contemporary art. I just touched it briefly, but we do that a lot as well, that we try to see how can we convert this, you say, the colonial gaze art, and it's maybe not like that, but to translate it into more contemporary ways of artistic expression and in displaying them. So I'm looking forward to the results of the second Endangered Stories project, where we will have graphic novels dealing with local stories and so forth. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think there's a hand raised by Delphine. Can we wait with this question until the final discussion so that Sonja can give her presentation first, or is this really urgent related to the previous question?
Just one more thing. Maybe it also relates to your question, and it relates to sometimes the doubts I have about the work that I do. Sometimes I feel like, why am I the person, the white German, the person doing that, or leading that thing going on in that space? So the white savior narratives kind of thing. I didn't get the chance, and I also noted it for the presentation, but it's something definitely to reflect in our work, just to mention that.
Okay. So then we welcome Sonja back. And Sonja, I will just click your presentation. So just let me know when I'm supposed to change the slides, okay?
Well, let's begin. So first of all, I'm sorry about these technicalities. Thank you for organizing this, I think, important exchange and dialogues to give the possibility to speak about the German heritage in Africa. So this place, the Palais de Lomé, is really embedded in colonial discourse, because it used to be the German colonial palace, so the German governor's colonial palace. So it's currently the largest building in German building in West Africa, West and Central. So it is in the city center. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So it's just in front of the Atlantic in an 11-hectare park. So biodiversity is really part of the topic as well, which makes us unique is that we mix heritage, nature, and biodiversity. So it's the next slide. So this is what we are doing. So we are doing many things because we think that we are driven by our local communities, what is relevant to our local audience. So what do our audiences want? And that's what is relevant to us. And what we do is to follow always also the spirit of the building itself and the venue. It's a venue surrounded by nature, so nature is very important. And thanks to that, we had to work and to connect the DNA of a place with nature. So next, please. So this is a place of a complicated history because it was a place with a colonial legacy. So the German, then you have a double flag period. The double flag period is when you had French and British governors place after World War I. Then the French took over. So it was always a place of power and exclusion. So how to transform this place of power and exclusion to something that is ours, that is for every Togolese. So the place was, maybe we can just, and this is ironical, but I wanted to show it. The next slide, it's a slide where you can see this arrogant German governor. For me, it's really very typical of colonial times. This umbrella, the German with his helmet, the German shield. So all this is very typical for that time of domination. So how do we transform that place into a place that is for everyone? The place was abandoned for more than 20 years. As you can see, it was abandoned for more than 20 years. It's the next picture. So during that time, trees grew inside, which was very beautiful, of course, very romantic, but it couldn't stay like that. And one of the questions was, what do you do afterwards? What do we do out of this building? How do we transform it? Will it be a museum? Will we let it ruin and then build something else? Destroy it and then rebuild it? And this question is a question that was asked often in Africa. So to give you an example, the opposite example, it was in Côte d'Ivoire, so not German colonial heritage, but French colonial heritage. And President Houphouët at that time of the independence of Côte d'Ivoire decided to destroy the building because he wanted to start from afresh. So this could have been done, but Togolese decided to take another path. So after the place was abandoned, the Togolese government decided, and it's not that often in the continent that the government decided themselves to fund the transformation of the building and to open it to the public. So, and I was entrusted with the project, and I was lucky to be the founding director of it. So to oversee all the construction and the various steps. So to do also the construction and the restoration of the place, we worked with local firms, 10 local firms. So it was in itself a journey. And at the end, the project is to present the best of the creation of the Africa and its diasporas. So to shift the narrative and to tell our stories. So this is the next slide. So this is the pictures of how the place was before its renovation with trees growing inside. And so we wanted, and the renovation, what was important for us was to be very truthful to the building. So we work on archival images to find how it was before, because it was heavily damaged. So to be truthful to a building, but at the same time to respect what we are today, what Togo is today. So this is now the palais. So the upcoming slide. So it was then, this is now. And the next slide, it's a place where what we wanted to, one of our first exhibitions was called The Togo of the Kings. So for this exhibition, we asked the kings that you see here that were denied their chieftaincies during German and then French colonial times. They were denied their chieftaincy. So we invited them over to the exhibition. So we co-created the exhibition with them, asking them what for you is important, what kind of objects you want to show and to highlight to our Togolese audience. So it was the first time ever in Togo that these artifacts were presented, and the chief explained the symbol of the object. So previously, among the questions, they were in the previous talks, some of the person, I think it's Delphine, but I'm not sure, mentioned the fact that there are issues about the sources and the oral sources. But I think that still in local communities, you still find people that are the curator of local memories and that can speak about it. So we worked with them to create our exhibition, Togo of the Kings, so that from the German colonial times, where these kings' power were denied, we wanted to invite them over to take over the place as well. So this is the upcoming slide. So this is a king in traditional attire. So for the exhibition, we've really co-worked with the local communities. So when we began the exhibition, we didn't know what would be the result because it was really a dialogue with them. So yep, come next. So in this exhibition, we gave also a hint of contemporary art and pictures. So that it was a mixture of traditional and contemporary, which was for this work, for instance, by the contemporary artist Sokeidor, is called the Wisdom of Kings, and is based on proverbs, because all the exhibition was based on Togolese proverbs, which is a way of storytelling that is different from the usual narrative of Western countries where the narrative is very linear. The proverbs can be riddles. So that's the spirit of this exhibition. And as a result, and this is the upcoming slide, you have people, many family coming. So what was important for us is to always have an intergenerational approach. So to be relevant to each of our audiences, and families come, and we have an increasing number of families that come over. So over pictures of our exhibitions in the upcoming slides. So yes, we were speaking about narrative. This lady is a traditional storyteller. So we work with storytellers so that they can explain the exhibitions through their manner of storytelling that is very specific to West Africa. So we work with them to explain the exhibition, the works, but also the park, the nature, and the artwork. So it's also walks, we organize walks throughout the park and the palais, where people can talk and storytellers can tell their story following traditional manners. So it's another way to question the narrative and the way of speaking that came from the West. So to create links with our local agencies or our traditions in Togo. So, and then next. So we work also with other African countries to tell the stories. So for instance, this exhibition that is currently running is an exhibition that was co-curated by a Ghanaian curator, worked with Nigerian institutions. So it's a mixture of collaboration across the region to be able also to work and speak about our narrative. So the exhibition is in 3 languages. In Ewe language is a local language that is spoken in Togo and Ghana. So it's written in Ewe, English, French. So it's a means for us also to question and reinvigorate also the way of speaking. All our exhibitions have guides, and the local guides speak several languages, of course, English, French, but also several local languages. So it's a means for us to welcome our guests, to say, well, now it used to be the house of special guests. Now you are our special guest. So next. And sorry, can we go in the previous? So for instance, these chairs that you can see on the wall, we work with iron workers so that they can work and do made-to-measure work. So the process, each time for each of our exhibition, we work with also local artisans to be part of the process of exhibiting, so that they can also enhance their skills in how to exhibit, how to produce furniture to exhibit. So the behind the scenes of the exhibitions are also related to local know-how and craftsmanship. So next, so this is another exhibition. Let's go maybe to the next one. So what is very important in our DNA is that it's a park, it's a palace that is inside a park. And when the park was structured during German colonial times, it was being German introduced trees that came from other parts, that came from Asia, for instance. So it's also interesting, the history of the park and the history of the trees itself tells about globalization and colonization. So it's now part of it. So the alleyways that date back from German colonial times that you can see, for instance, on our right, is very structured, very German style, let's say. So you have all these alleys that lead to main roads of Lomé, but we let also the park grow and have surprises and unexpected. So now when you walk through the park, it's a park that is inspired by the various landscapes of Togo. So we didn't cut the trees that grow during the time the place was abandoned, but we introduced other species that you can find in other regions of Togo. So the park serves two roles. It's environmental because it protects the biodiversity in the city center, but it's also a way to learn, and it's also pedagogical. So it provides visitors the opportunity to discover the biodiversity. So now the next slide, please. So in the park, you also have, when you walk through the park, you see also work of art. What I wanted to insist on is that we work also with traditional healers who have the knowledge of how to use plants that were specific to Togo and West Africa. So we share that also with our audiences to how the plants were used in textile, but also in traditional medicine. So it's really a park where you can engage conversations about the local and the know-how that were transmitted throughout times. So next slide. So yes, I wanted to say that we have several educational activities. We can go through it, through the slides. One of the ways to engage is dance. Throughout dance, we do also, it's too fast. So we do also, dance, for instance, is a way to engage using traditions and traditional dance with the children. The children, we have drawing lessons where they draw connected to the park. So it's a means for them to be introduced to art through and biodiversity, to examine the biodiversity and reflect upon it and learn from it. So the next, we work with, we can go through with local associations. So what is very important, the previous one, please, is that we work also with weavers. So all of our exhibitions always involve artisans and craftsmen. So for instance, these weavers that worked did scarves that were hand-woven textiles, so with a very traditional technique, and the colors were inspired by the feathers of a bird, one of the 31 species of birds that are in the park. So it's a way for us to speak and to discuss about nature. So someone who buys this scarf also enable a craftsman to show and to live economically through his work, but also to learn about the birds that are in the park. So it's always, we try to blend culture and biodiversity each time in each of our steps. So the next is that we work with craftsmen, as we said. So potters. So for instance, this pottery served as basis for the next slide. For this work of art, that is the porter is not included in the work. It's just the basis to present it, which means that the artist was happy also when we asked him if we could use that as exhibition design and scenography to work with potters. So it was a collaboration that enables also potters to show their know-how. So which was also a means to always engage with the local communities. I think that one of the important ways to decolonize is to recontextualize it in local communities. How is it relevant today for the Togolese of today to come inside this building? So we shift the narrative. Of course, we speak about the history, the past, the heritage, but moreover, more important is to speak about the future and the creation and the creativity of Africa and its diasporas. So we receive many tourists that come from, France, Germany, but we have an increasing number of people that come from other countries across the region, so Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, and they come to visit this place. So it's also a means to be relevant in our region. So these are a few highlights of what we are doing for the Palais de Lomé. I think it's the last slide.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I'm glad we could see your presentation, and now we have time for 3 final questions before we are all inviting you outside to continue the conversation over a little bit of food and drinks.
Yes, thank you for the nice presentation. I have 3 short questions. So at the beginning of your presentation, you said in the restoration work, you were trying to follow the spirit of the palace. I'm anxious to know which is that, or which was that spirit of the palace that you were trying to follow. And the second point is, I'm also curious to know whether in such a palace you also have maybe a space for resistance fighters at the time that that palace was being built, and maybe a space in the memory of those who lost their lives while building that palace. And the third one, I saw a bird. I was thinking that maybe the name would be a name from Togo, but then it's a name. It's a Latin name. Was it a bird from Germany, or is it really a bird from Togo? So thank you very much.
Thank you for this insight. I understand your question. So the first question about the spirit of a place, it was not the spirit of domination of German. When I said the spirit, it was more in the sense of to follow the architectural rules, because the venue was given that the palace was abandoned, it was important to restore it following what it was before. So with space circulations and to do a renovation that was not contemporary, that respected the architectural structure. So that's what I said about the spirit. But of course, we changed the spirits, introducing our spirits that is totally different. So for instance, that's why the space is always inside out, inside outside. So each time you arrive in a place, in a room, you see the park. So this is what we call the spirit. So it's not the domination spirit and of all that German spirit of that time, which, by the way, Togo was called, ironically enough, the Muster colony, but Muster to be looted, Muster, which means the role model colony, because it was easier to loot it. But anyway, so this is the first question. The second one, to answer your point about the people who died, and it's a very important point, because there are also people who died, and that's why this place is embedded in Togolese history. During colonial times, the German colonization was very brutal. So you had people that died during that time, but also in Togolese history, at the end of the 80s, events took place in the Palais. It was attacked, so that's why it was abandoned. So what we did is that we did a ceremony before even beginning all the restoration work, we did a ceremony we did a ceremony for the spirit of those people who died during that colonization time and during all this history of the palais. That is a history that was very brutal and violent. So we did a ceremony for their spirit in following several religions, traditional religions, Christian, Muslim, so several, and we work also with traditional priests to appease the spirit and to tell them our gratitude and that we hope they rest in peace. So yes, we did that. It's not a memorial, it's not a physical and material one. We did an immaterial one. So this is the first thing. And to answer your last question, why did we use a scientific name in Latin? The real name is Yotutu. In Ewe, it's Yotutu. But we used the international Latin name of this bird that is totally from West Africa.
Thank you very much, Sonia.
I should have written Yotutu, you're right.
As we saw already 3 questions, and now I'm finishing the conversation here over Zoom and invite everyone who is here in presence with us to join us outside to continue the conversation over drinks and a little bite to eat. And there's
just a very last word. Thank you for all the online participants. It was great that you were around, even if we couldn't see or engage with most of you. I'm looking forward to see you tomorrow again and see all of you tomorrow again at 10 o'clock back here in this room. And for the ones who are on site, as Sarah already said, there's I guess a pretty German reception waiting outside there. So yeah, thank you everyone for this wonderful day.